haven't started. Welcome back to Never Settle. On today's episode, we're talking about be a leader and influencer, not a follower. I have the founder of Renewable, Xavier DeRoos, on our podcast today. Xavier, thank you so much for being here, sharing your message.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for having me, Sarah. I appreciate it.
Before we get into today's episode, I want to first give a thank you and shout out to Zencastr, our sponsor of today's show. Zencastr is the chosen platform that I'm hosting this podcast on, which has made it easy for me to host this podcast from anywhere in the world and takes a lot of the guesswork out of it. Stay tuned for more in today's episode. So being a leader and influencer, and not necessarily a follower. Can you break that down a little bit? Because I pulled that from one of your shares on social media, and it was very profound because I agree. You know, one of my favorite, that's the core of what this podcast is to learn to think for yourself. What does that mean in relation to a renewable?
Well, I think that's a good point. And I think that it kind of happened, I don't know really how to say it, but it's important to be the leader and to just do whatever you think is right, you know? And if people agree with what you're doing, then they will follow that. And I think that making it accessible and making it easy to have people follow after the direction that you're trying to show as a possibility. It's a good feeling also to know that people are saying like, hey, I really like what you're doing. How can I help? How can I support that? And again, when I say the Renewable Community Compost Program, it starts with the community there, because you can't do it alone, and you can't do it with your own ideas. So always getting feedback, even from other people, is important as an influencer, or as a follower, or as a thought leader, or as a person just trying to do something that's new. Knowing that you can try it and also get feedback, and it doesn't have to be the same direction that you started in. I don't know if that's maybe not clear enough, but
let's break that down a little bit even more. You know, so say you wanted to start. You know, you saw nobody else composting. Right. And you said, I really want to bring this here. You have many uphill battles. How does one start on a different path, be able to take on that load of going against the grain in a lot of ways, and know, do I continue on this, or when does one fold? Do they, you know, or is there always a way? What would you suggest to somebody in that similar path?
I think, again, getting that feedback and being amendable, right? Because the original thought of the Renewable Community Compost is not exactly the path that it's destined to be on forever. And it can always be changed, and it can always be influenced again by the people who are your followers, and it should have that feedback loop. It's not all you being a leader. It's you taking a thought and then working with the people who are willing to support that thought to make it better and to make it more efficient. I really I think it's very important to always, like, the best leaders lead from the back. You know what I mean? If you're going
but share more on that, because I think it's a very profound statement that you just shared.
I mean, in wolves, the alpha is always in the back of the pack, and that's because he wants to make sure that everybody is accounted for. If you're always leading in the front with like the ego as a main part, a family member is home. This is exciting. If you're always leading from the front, then you never get to see the perspective. You never hear the feedback from the people in the back. And then you can be leading yourself in a direction that might not have all the insight that it could, because the perspective is different. So you also don't want to leave people in the behind, because behind you in the path, because those are the people that make up your pack. That's how you build your security. That's how you build your community. That's from the weakest to the strongest. It needs to be very close knit. You know, you need to have those people that are the weakest always being led. And
phenomenal example. That's a great example. What did Renewable start out as, you know, in relation to the example you just gave? What did it start out as, and how did you pivot?
Sure, that's a great question. So originally we were, if you look at the logo, it's a bamboo pole, and that's because the foundation of bamboo is really important, and it's an opportunity that I saw first as a place through my permaculture and through my experience of trying to integrate economy and community and agriculture, because I believe that agriculture is a foundation that we're missing a lot of in, specifically here in North America, but throughout the world. Um, we started out as a bamboo company that was focused on carbon credits, working to populate a bamboo industry in North America. Bamboo is a fantastic sequestration model for plants. It's the highest of plants. It's a grass and it grows perennially, so you can harvest yearly after year seven, for up to 140 years, depending on the species, after one planting. You don't have to go and plant and then wait for example, a tree. So there's all these examples that are pointing to bamboo. We had a program set up, and apparently there were some complications at the last minute that didn't allow that program to go forward as fast as we wanted. So we were looking for other opportunities in the sustainability space, and I just realized that I was already doing it in my backyard. I was actually doing something that I believed in personally enough to go out there and sweat on a regular basis in South Florida and deal with my own food scraps and my friends, and monitoring temperature and humidity and making sure that these things are mixed regularly, because we do it aerobically. We add oxygen to this process so that it converts methane into small amounts of carbon dioxide. Methane is greenhouse gas that is 21 to 80 times, depending on the life cycle that you're talking about. It's up to 80 times more potent as a greenhouse gas in the first 20 years than carbon dioxide. And food waste emits a lot of it when you landfill it. So depending on how you're dealing with this waste stream, you have this opportunity. And I was just realizing, like, okay, we don't need to just focus on bamboo. We can be a lot of sustainable things, and we can have all of these sustainable threads. And when that program is ready, we'll be able to turn that one on as well. So just saw this opportunity, and we're still a growing business, but the model is clear ahead of us. There are people that have done this at the community level and done a really good job. I'm not reinventing the wheel here. I'm just bringing the opportunity here to South Florida.
Yes, and I think that's the key takeaway there is you're bringing the light to where there was no lighthouse before.
Mm.
Methane, so cow farts and fruit compost, kids who are listening and warriors.
Well, it's
Methane gases.
important too.
What
Yeah.
I would love to know a little bit more as well, if you can define what permaculture is for those who are listening, and then also what's the process of composting? Because oftentimes, if you say composting, you think, oh, I have this smelly trash that's in my backyard. Well, I don't have a backyard, but there's a lot of other options. So break down a little bit, what is permaculture? Then what's the process of composting? And how can one say, I'm in an apartment building right here in Miami. How can I do that in my own building, my own unit? Let me take a little break here. You've noticed I've been doing a lot more podcasting lately. And it's not that I've had more time, it's that Zencastr has made it a lot easier to record high quality video, high quality audio. They even have post-production services right within their platform and software. It comes out a lot easier, faster, cleaner, so I can do what it is that I'm really good at, and that's connecting with you, the listener, and the audience who wants to chime in what it is to never settle.
Okay. Well, permaculture is a concept of utilizing the Earth's natural processes and the pros and cons of nature to our benefits, right? So, harvesting what's around us locally, interacting and observing with nature, seeing how nature handles its own problems, and then trying to emulate that, because we're a part of the ecosystem. We're not the leaders of the ecosystem. We need to be more integrated inside of that, and using your resources, which we'll talk about more when we talk about what the composting process is. is important part of that, you know. So instead of having to always be adding, for instance, in a permaculture garden, instead of adding constant fertilization from the outside, buying different types of fertilizers and pesticides, you would have an ecological system that balances and checks your pesticides and adds fertility, such as, you know, dropping leaf matter and creating that fertility. And one of those aspects in permaculture is composting. Um, I talked to a good friend of mine, Megan, who's a permaculture instructor here in South Florida. If anybody's looking for a course, I would highly recommend her, Megan Kelly.
Let's drop that link below in the description.
Yeah, that'd be great. Her first thing is like, if we could just get people to compost, you know, that's a great first step to building fertility in the space and the place that we're in. And I totally agree with that. So when we talk about the process of composting, most people do think of it just as this stinky, smelly food waste conglomeration. And for a lot of people, it is, because they're not doing it correctly. Going back to what we're like really trying to do right now is education. And it's really difficult because people are not familiar with it, and they have all of these negative connotations already associated to composting. Oh, it's stinky. Oh, it brings flies and fruit flies and bugs and mice. And when you're not doing it properly, absolutely, it sure
So
can.
let's flip that. What's the proper
Mhm.
way of doing it?
So the important thing is to know that there's a balance of nitrogen and carbon. And food waste is a heavy nitrogen product. So you need to balance that with an appropriate amount of carbon. Carbon can be things like paper shreds from your junk mail. You don't want to put anything in there that's glossy, like a shiny paper, and you don't want to include any of the plastic liners that would be on your junk mail, on your, you know, on your envelopes, that you would want to peel that off separately, and you could throw that in
The window
in
reveal,
your
yes.
recycling, your trash.
Yeah.
I don't think that's recyclable. I think you'd have to put that in a landfill. But
That,
you want to avoid
yeah.
that kind of stuff. Cardboard from Amazon. We all order from Amazon all the time. Those boxes can be, if you don't have a proper cardboard recycling, which if you do, you should utilize that. But if you don't, compost that. You can shred them up into small pieces and then add that to your pile. You can use things like wood shavings, mulch. You can use a lot of different things. I'll add the list from our website. We can add it to the show notes as
Perfect.
well.
You have a lot of
There's a
resources
whole
on your
list.
website as well. I know that.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, we're working to always add more, and um, it seems like you can never add enough, right? So we're trying to always take people's questions and then add that to a frequently asked questions database, so that we don't have to um, and encounter the same issues over and over, you know. So fruit peels, fruit stickers. Fruit stickers are something that we want to avoid from the fruit peels, just like we want to take the labels and the tape off of the cardboard and the envelope letters. Getting that source separation is really important to the proper composting process. But adding carbon sources to the appropriate ratio, probably 2 or 3 times the carbon source to nitrogen, which is where a lot of people have a stinky mess, because they're adding too much of their food waste and not enough of this carbon material. So it's making sure that you're sourcing that becomes the other part of composting, right? You can use wood shavings. So, or you can subscribe to a service. There are, depending, I don't know where all of your listeners are, but there are community composting programs like ours popping up all over the country. So if you don't want to deal with the composting yourself, you could always outsource this to somebody that could. That being said, I know your question was, what about if I live in an apartment?
Well, just
Real
to
quick,
one second on there, because I want to break. There's just one question that I want to interject as well,
yeah, sure.
to add to that. You know, it takes an effort. At the end of the day, it does take a little bit of an effort. It's not impossible, but it does take an effort. And that's where some people will say,
Yeah.
meh, I'd just rather throw it out. Or, you know, some things I throw into the disposal.
Mm-hmm.
What's in it for the consumer? At the end of the day, people are self-driven. And
Absolutely.
I have to ask that because it's the mindset and psychology of majority of mankind. So what's in it for the human?
Well, composting brings a lot of benefits. It brings healthier food to our local food system. That's a big one. It also reduces our carbon footprint significantly. And when I say significantly, for example, 10 tons of food waste that gets diverted is the equivalent of roughly 9 tons of carbon dioxide being reduced from the atmosphere. So it's a big payoff.
Wow.
The other thing is that instead of releasing that methane and the greenhouse gases associated, it's providing a natural resource. And compost is this really wonderful fertilizer material that you can add to plants. I know gardeners are very familiar with it, but for the average person, they might not be. But compost adds a lot of fertility and soil structure to our South Florida, in particular, our South Florida sandy soil, which doesn't hold a lot of moisture, doesn't hold a lot of nutrients, and doesn't hold runoff very well. So composting, when you add 1 pound of compost to 33 pounds, I'm sorry, to 100, you add 1 pound of compost to 100 pounds of soil, you can increase the water retention to an extra 33 gallons of water, an extra 33 pounds of water. So it really does change the structure of the soil. And what that means for us is when we're driving here in South Florida and all the streets are flooded, that doesn't need to be the case. We can improve all of our local soils and hold a lot more of that water from our natural rain that we get within such a rainy environment and deal with it, in a more manageable way. Instead of spending millions of dollars to immediately pump this water, which, by the way, has all of the pesticides and fertilizers that have been sprayed on the agricultural lands, and we pump it directly into our waterways. A lot of times we get it off as fast as we can. And instead of that, we can keep all of those nutrients, and instead of needing the synthetic fertilizers in the first place, we can keep that
Keep
nutrient
it
inside of our
within.
local, right inside of our community, and keep the water away. There's a very cool demonstration. I will have to put it on the website because it puts that concept into perspective of what it means for our local
I
day to day
mean,
lives.
yeah, it sounds selfish, but it's what drives change
Mhm.
oftentimes. Just as we quickly wrap up, and I want to leave all the resources that you shared in the description because there's so many. That's the whole reason. Quickly, when we met at the Seed, Food, and Wine, and I saw as I was walking around the festival, you had a really brilliant infographic that says compost this, do not compost that. And it was like simple, and it gets it across, and it shows exactly what you can do and what you can't do. And it's that kind of information education that I feel it's again, it's so simple, yet it's lacking. And that little bit of information can make a big change. So, in the last note of this, just share what can I do in my apartment here? Aside from hiring a service, what can I do to compost within my own unit?
There's This is why I
I've
started the business, because
I've
the
seen the little ones before.
yeah.
Do they
So
work?
those don't work. Those are
They don't
really
work. Okay.
no. And no, I haven't found any that work long term. And the problem with composting like that is that you're always adding. And compost has phases where you're adding, where it's doing its active phase, and then where it's curing. And most of these like self tumblers, that only is a adding and active. You don't get that curing phase, so you're never really ready to use that compost by the time you
Got
need
it.
it. So if you're going to get an apartment, what you would need to do if you're going to do it yourself would be have two of those double tumblers or three regular tumblers is what I would recommend, where you can put those phases separately. Again, that takes some time and that takes some commitment. You can also save it. I know that there are a couple drop off locations, like for community gardens, that will accept food waste if you go and drop it off. You would probably just want to, take a couple freezer bags and then, or paper bags and put them in your freezer rather, and then take those all to those community drop off spots. That would probably be what I'd recommend for somebody in an apartment that wanted to be involved. Right now, again, the infrastructure is not what it needs to be, and hopefully we'll be able to change that soon. But I know that there's only one or two drop-off spots in all of South Florida all of Miami and Broward that I know of that accept food waste. So
Thank you for being a part of that change, and let's hope to continue
Yeah.
to make an effort towards that. Thank you so much, Xavier. I'm going to drop all of the information that we shared. You have so many different valuable educational tips, your website, you share posts that are so helpful and useful and inspirational. I shared actually 3 of them with a friend of mine that we're working on creating a project, and that just keep doing what you're doing, and there is a lot of potential for change, and you are spearheading that. So thank you for being an influencer in that space for composting and sustainable mindset, as you shared in the beginning, which I thought was a beautiful term.
Absolutely. And thank you for having me, Sarah. I really appreciate this.
That wraps up today's episode of Never Settle. I want to thank you for tuning in, and again, a big thank you to Zencastr. If you'd like to try Zencastr and podcasting, you can use my code, which is linked below, for a 3-month discount on your service. See you again on another upcoming episode of Never Settle.